A family is told they can't sit together. A flight attendant, drunk on her own small power, decides to make them an example. She accuses the father of fraud. She calls security to have him dragged off the plane. She has no idea she just made the worst mistake of her career. Because as the cabin held its breath, the father reached into his jacket. He wasn't a professor, as he appeared. He was a high-level CIA officer, and he was done being polite. What happened next destroyed careers and cost an airline millions. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar soup of anxiety, stale pretzels, and jet fuel. It was the Friday before a holiday weekend, and the terminal throbbed with a frantic energy. Dr. Mason Thorne navigated the chaos with a practiced, almost unnervingly calm demeanor. He was a tall man, built like a former athlete, but he dressed with the intentional blandness of a tenured history professor, which was, in fact, his official cover. His wire-rimmed glasses and worn leather satchel completed the picture. Beside him, his wife, Dr. Emiah Thorne, a pediatrician with a smile that could disarm a tantrum at 20 paces, was managing the family's passports. "Clara, please, phone away for 5 minutes. Liam, hold my hand, sweetie." Clara, 14, and surgically attached to her device, rolled her eyes but complied. "The lounge was so much quieter, Dad. Why do we always have to board with the cattle?" "It builds character, Chloe," Mason said, his eyes scanning the crowd. He wasn't just looking, he was observing. He noted the 2 men in ill-fitting suits lingering too long near the duty-free, the nervous backpacker sweating in the air conditioning, the cleaning crew member who hadn't moved from one spot in 10 minutes. It was a habit he couldn't turn off. "I just want to see the big engine." Liam, 8 years old and vibrating with excitement, clutched a small die-cast model of a Boeing 780 Aspen. The first hint of trouble came at the Global Sky Airlines check-in desk. The agent, a woman named Brenda, with a severe haircut and a name tag that looked like a warning, typed their names with aggressive, clacking sounds. She grunted. Emiah leaned forward. "Is there a problem?" "We've had an equipment change," Brenda said, not looking up. "The seating map is chaotic. You booked 4 together." "Yes," Mason said, his voice pleasant but firm. "Row 12, A, B, C, and D. Bulkhead. We booked it 6 months ago, specifically for Liam's legs." Brenda's eyes flickered up, taking in the family. Mason knew the look. It was the look that calculated, assessed, and, more often than not, dismissed. "Well, the system has you. Scattered. 12A, 19C, 28B, and 34E. "That's unacceptable," Emiah said, her warm demeanor evaporating. "We paid extra for those seats. We are traveling with 2 minor children. We will not be separated." Brenda sighed, a theatrical performance of exasperation. "Mom, it's a full flight. The system does what it does. I can't magically create 4 seats together." Mason placed his hand gently on the counter. "Brenda," he said, reading her tag, his voice dropping just a fraction. It wasn't threatening, but it was suddenly void of all warmth. "I'm sure you're very busy, but I need you to look at our original booking confirmation. We have a contract for 4 adjacent seats. Now you can either honor that confirmation or you can find your supervisor." Something in his tone made Brenda pause. The practiced dismissiveness faltered. She typed for another 30 seconds, her fingers noticeably softer on the keys. "Ah," she said, her voice tight. "It looks like there was a manual override that hadn't filtered through. Your original seats, 12A, B, C, and D, are still assigned to you." "How fortunate." She printed the boarding passes and handed them over without making eye contact. "Enjoy your flight to London." As they walked away, Emiah let out a slow breath. "That was awful." Why is it always a fight, Mason? People see what they want to see, honey, he murmured, steering Liam toward the security line. They see a black family and assume we're on a package deal, not that we paid for bulkhead. Clara had her phone out again. She was totally racist, Dad. She was stressed and defaulted to the path of least resistance, Mason corrected gently, which for her meant trying to push us around. But his eyes were cold. He knew bias when he saw it. It was lazy, it was dangerous, and it was a variable he constantly had to factor in. Boarding was, as Clara had predicted, a zoo. Flight 112 to Heathrow was oversold. The gate area was a mess of screaming children, anxious business travelers, and families struggling with too much luggage. Group 2, families with small children, now boarding. The Thorns shuffled forward, joining the stream of people funneling down the jet bridge. Liam pressed his face against the small window. "It's the 787, Dad. The Dreamliner. Look at the wings." Mason smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. "They are amazing, buddy. Built for a smooth ride." They stepped onto the aircraft, greeted by a blast of recycled air and the harried faces of the cabin crew. Mason's eyes did their automatic scan. 2 in the galley, 1 in the aisle. The one in the aisle, a blonde woman in her late 40s with a smile plastered on so tight it looked painful, pointed them forward. Business and first to the left, main cabin to the right. "We're in row 12, Mason said, holding up their passes. The flight attendant's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Row 12, main cabin. To the right, sir." They shuffled down the narrow aisle, Mason leading, Liam behind him. Then Emia, then Clara. They reached row 12, the bulkhead, and stopped. In seat 12C, Liam's aisle seat, a man was already sitting. He was a portly man in an expensive but rumpled suit, his laptop open, his face set in a scowl. "Excuse me," Mason said, his voice polite. "I believe you're in my son's seat." The man, Mr. Henderson, according to his luggage tag, huffed. "No, I'm not. I'm in 12C. He held up his boarding pass. "See? 12C. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Mason held up his own stack of passes. "So are we. This is 12A, B, C, and D. This is our row." The impasse hung in the air. Passengers were backing up behind them. A baby started to cry. The tense energy of the terminal had followed them onto the plane. From behind them, a sharp voice cut through the murmur. "Is there a problem here?" Mason turned. It was the blonde flight attendant from the door. Her name tag read Susan. She was no longer smiling. Susan Miller was having a terrible day. Her commute had been a nightmare. Her supervisor, Darian, had criticized her for being 2 minutes late, and this flight was oversold by 20 people. She was the lead flight attendant, the purser's second in command, and she felt the weight of an on-time departure pressing down on her. She saw the logjam at row 12 and marched forward, her patience already shredded. "What is the problem?" she repeated, her voice projecting down the aisle. "There's a simple mistake," Mason said calmly, turning to face her. "This gentleman is in 12C, but my son's boarding pass is also for 12C. Our entire family is booked in this row." Susan looked from Mason to Mr. Henderson. Her eyes lingered on Mason, on his academic glasses, his slightly rumpled sweater. Then she looked at Mr. Henderson, in his suit, already typing on a high-end laptop. She made a calculation. "Sir," she said to Mason, "let me see your boarding passes." Mason handed them over. Susan glanced at them, then at Mr. Henderson's. "Mr. Henderson is a Platinum Medallion member," Susan said, as if this explained everything. "His seat is 12C. The check-in agent," she said, tapping Mason's passes, "clearly made a mistake. You're the ones who were reseated." "No," Emia said, stepping forward. "That's incorrect. The agent at the desk, Brenda, confirmed these seats after the system tried to move us. She reprinted them. We are in 12A, B, C, and D. Susan's eyes narrowed. Ma'am, the manifest is the final word. And my manifest says, Mr. Henderson is here. She pointed at Liam. Besides, children under 10 aren't supposed to be in bulkhead rows. It's a safety rule. Airbag deployment. This was a new and entirely false claim. Emir, a pediatrician who had researched this very thing, was ready. That's not true. Your own airline's policy, Section 4A12, states that children over 2 are permitted in bulkhead seats as long as they don't require a car seat. Liam is 8. We checked. Susan's face flushed. Being corrected by a passenger, especially on a policy she had just invented, was infuriating. The line of passengers behind them was growing, the muttering getting louder. I don't have time to debate policy with you, Susan snapped. This plane needs to leave. I have a new seat for your son, 34E. It's a middle seat. No, Mason said. His voice was still quiet, but it had a new edge. I'll say this one more time. We are a family of 4. We will not be separating our 8-year-old son and sending him to the back of the plane alone. Then you can go with him, Susan retorted. And your wife can sit in 28B, and your daughter in 19C. Those were your new assignments. Those are not our assignments, Mason said, holding his ground. The aisle was a pressure cooker. We are in this row. This is a simple double booking. The professional way to handle this is to check the manifest, find the error, and move the person who was booked last. Or you can ask Mr. Henderson if he would be willing to move. Mr. Henderson scoffed. I'm not moving. I'm platinum. I booked this seat. End of story. Susan smiled triumphantly at Mason. See? He's not moving. So you have to. This was the moment. Mason recognized it. It was a power play, pure and simple. Susan had chosen her side, and she was going to enforce it. We are not moving, Mason said. The cabin seemed to fall silent. Even the crying baby paused. Sir, Susan said, her voice dripping with artificial, menacing sweetness. You are delaying the departure of an international flight. You are currently non-compliant. If you do not take your assigned seats. These are our assigned seats, Clara cut in, her voice sharp. My mum just told you. We have the confirmation. You're bullying us. Clara, Emir warned, putting a hand on her daughter's arm. Susan's head whipped toward Clara. Young lady, you will not speak to me that way. This is a federal aircraft, and I am in charge of safety. Your parents are teaching you to be disruptive. She turned back to Mason. Sir, I am giving you a final warning. Take the new seats, or I will have you removed from this aircraft. Liam, overwhelmed, burst into tears. I don't want to. I want to sit with Daddy. Daddy, don't let her take me. He buried his face in Mason's leg. The sight of his crying son broke through Mason's practiced calm, but it had the opposite effect on Susan. She saw it as a weakness, a tactic. Oh, stop it, she sneered, directed at Liam. This is exactly why children shouldn't be up here. You're manipulating your parents, and they're delaying 200 people. An older woman in row 13, who had been watching the entire exchange, spoke up. For heaven's sake, woman, she called out. He's just a little boy. Can't you see you're the one making a scene? Just get your manager. This passenger, a grandmotherly type named Mrs. Peterson, had just made herself Susan's new target. Susan whirled on her. Ma'am, this does not concern you. Stay out of it. It concerns all of us, a man in row 14 added. We just want to go. Exactly, Susan shouted, her composure cracking. And this family is stopping us. She grabbed the in-flight phone from the bulkhead wall. Darian, I need you at 12 Charlie. I have a non-compliant family, refusing to take their seats. They're becoming aggressive." "Aggressive?" Emiya said, her voice rising in disbelief. "We have done nothing but stand here. You are the one being aggressive." A moment later, Darian Smith, the purser, arrived. He was a slick man in a perfectly pressed uniform, and he immediately stood beside Susan, creating a wall. "What's the problem, Susan?" "This family," Susan said, gesturing at the thorns as if they were a piece of spilled trash, "is refusing to move. Their passes are glitched. The system moved them. I have new seats, but they are refusing and delaying the flight. The father is being belligerent." "Belligerent?" Mason echoed, his voice dangerously low. "I have been perfectly calm. You, on the other hand, have insulted my children and lied about airline policy." Darian Smith held up a hand. He looked at Mason with utter disinterest. "Sir, I'm not going to argue. Susan is in charge of this cabin. She has given you a lawful instruction. You will either take the seats she has provided, or you will be deplaned. What is it going to be?" He didn't check the manifest. He didn't ask Mr. Henderson to verify his booking time. He simply and completely backed his colleague. It was a closing of the ranks. Mason looked at Susan's smug face and Darian's impatient one. He looked at his crying son and his wife, whose hands were shaking with rage. "We are not moving," Mason said. "Get the captain, or get security, because you are making a categorical error." Susan's eyes lit up. This was the opening she wanted. "Security it is," she hissed. "Darian, call airport police. Tell them we have a passenger. Let's see. A passenger who is causing a disturbance, and I believe his boarding passes are fraudulent." The word fraudulent echoed in the enclosed space. It was a heavy, dangerous word to throw around on an airplane. The passengers who heard it gasped. Mr. Henderson, in 12C, actually shrank in his seat, trying to make himself invisible. Emiya Thorne's blood ran cold. "Fraudulent! How dare you! We checked in with an agent! You have our passports! That is a slanderous, targeted accusation!" "We have no way of knowing that, ma'am," Darian said smoothly, backing Susan's play. "You're holding up passes for seats that are already assigned to a high-tier member. You're refusing lawful instructions. It's a logical conclusion." "That is not a logical conclusion. It is a racist leap," Clara shouted, and this time neither parent stopped her. She had her phone up, the red record light glowing. Susan saw the phone. "Oh, no, you don't." She lunged for it, trying to snatch it from Clara's hand. "Recording flight crew is prohibited." Mason's arm shot out, not touching Susan, but blocking her path to his daughter. His movement was fluid and lightning fast. "Do not," he said, and the single ice-cold command stopped Susan in her tracks. "You will not touch my daughter." Susan recoiled, genuinely shocked by his speed. She immediately reframed the event. "He threatened me. Darian, did you see that? He put his hands on me." "I did not touch you," Mason said, his eyes boring into hers. "I put my hand up. You, however, just tried to assault my 14-year-old child. That's it." Susan was practically screaming now, her professional mask completely gone. "You're done. You are a threat to this aircraft. Darian, they're off. All of them." Darian was already on the phone, his back to the thorns. "Yes, this is Purser Smith on Global Sky 112. We have a family in row 12 refusing to deplane. The father has become physically aggressive with my flight attendant, Susan Miller." "Yes, physically aggressive. We need them removed. And one of them is holding what appears to be a fraudulent boarding pass." Mason Thorne stood perfectly still. He was a man who had been in war zones. He had been interrogated in dark rooms by men with real weapons. He had negotiated with warlords and terrorists. and in all that time he had never felt the particular acidic rage he felt at this moment, standing in a metal tube, being accused of fraud by a flight attendant, while his son wept into his pants. His training was screaming at him, de-escalate, maintain cover, disappear. His heart was screaming at him, protect your family. Susan, he said, his voice a flat line. You have just told a spectacular, career-ending lie. You accused me of fraud, and you accused me of assault. I am giving you exactly one chance to retract that statement, apologize to my family, and find the correct seats on your manifest. One chance. Susan laughed. It was a brittle, ugly sound. You? You're giving me a chance? You're the one being thrown off the plane, you arrogant. Ma'am, please step aside. 2 men in the dark blue uniforms of the Port Authority Police had boarded the plane. They were both large, utility belt laden, and exuded an aura of no-nonsense. The first officer, Officer Jeffries, had a weary, seen-it-all face. The second, Officer Ramirez, was younger and looked tense. These are the ones, Susan said, pointing, her voice trembling with adrenaline and vindication. The father. Him. He assaulted me and he's non-compliant. They're holding fraudulent passes. Officer Jeffries sighed. This was the worst part of his job. Sir, he said to Mason, we've had a report that you're refusing a crew member's instructions. Officer, Mason replied, his voice a model of perfect calm. We are in the seats we paid for and checked in for. There is a double booking. Your flight attendant, Susan, refused to check her manifest, invented a safety rule, tried to separate our minor children, and then accused us of fraud when we refused. He's lying, Susan shrieked. He pushed me. Look, the whole cabin saw it. Officer Jeffries looked around. The cabin was a sea of smartphones. Mrs. Peterson from row 13 spoke up again. That is not true, officer. She's the one who lost control. She tried to grab that girl's phone, and the father just blocked her. He never touched her. This whole thing is a disgrace. Officer Jeffries's eye twitched. She said, was a nightmare. Sir, I don't care about the seating, he said, his patience gone. The crew wants you off the plane. That's their right. You're delaying the flight. We can sort out the why on the ground. Please grab your things and come with us. We are not deplaning, Emir said, her voice shaking but full of steel. We have done nothing wrong. We are ticketed passengers. Mom, if you don't come voluntarily, I will have to escort you. That means I will be forced to place you in restraints, Officer Ramirez said, his hand moving toward his cuffs. This was the precipice. This was the point of no return. Mason saw the terror in Emir's eyes, the defiant fear in Clara's, the absolute panic in Liam's. Susan was watching, her face a mask of pure, triumphant spite. Mason had one last card to play. He hated it. It was the card he never played. It was a violation of his deepest principles, a breach of his own security. But they had accused him of a crime. They had threatened his family. They had brought law enforcement. The rules of engagement had changed. Officer Jeffries, Mason said quietly, you are being given false information. Sir, I don't have time. You are being given false information, Mason repeated. That is putting this airline, and you, in a position of extreme legal and professional jeopardy. I am not a non-compliant passenger, and my documents are not fraudulent. He looked at Susan. You wanted to see my identification? You wanted to know who I am? He reached slowly, deliberately, into the inner breast pocket of his tweed jacket. Susan, high on her power, actually flinched back and yelped. He's reaching! He's reaching for something! Officer Ramirez tensed, his hand now gripping his baton. Sir, "Show me your hands. Slowly." The cabin gasped. Mason ignored Ramirez. His eyes were locked on Officer Jeffries. He slowly pulled out his wallet. It wasn't a standard leather bifold. It was a black, government-issue credential case. He didn't flip it open for the cabin to see. He opened it and held it 1 inch from Officer Jeffries's face. "My name," he said, his voice dropping into a register that was utterly devoid of emotion, "is Dr. Mason Thorne. I am a deputy director with the National Clandestine Service of the Central Intelligence Agency. I am traveling on non-official cover for sensitive government business. You are currently interfering with a federal officer in the performance of his duties. And you," he said, shifting his gaze to Susan, "have just accused a senior intelligence officer of fraud and assault in front of 200 people. I suggest you choose your next words with extreme caution." The silence that fell over the cabin was absolute. It was so total that the hum of the auxiliary power unit outside sounded like a roar. Officer Jeffries, the weary veteran, stared at the credentials. He wasn't just looking at a badge. He was looking at the embossed gold eagle, the signature of the director, and the classified security-level clearance printed beneath Mason's photograph. This was not a fake. This was not a joke. This was the real, unadulterated, "Oh my God" article. His entire demeanor changed in a nanosecond. His shoulders snapped back. His weariness was replaced by a sharp, sudden dread. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice suddenly formal and tight. "My apologies. We were not informed." Officer Ramirez, seeing his partner's reaction, went pale and took a half-step back, his hands dropping to his sides. Susan Miller, however, hadn't seen the ID clearly. She only saw the policeman's sudden deference. "What?" she demanded. "What is that? Some fake FBI badge you bought online? Officer, arrest him." Officer Jeffries turned on her, his face a mask of cold fury. "Ma'am," he bit off each word, "shut your mouth right now." Susan recoiled, stunned. Mason didn't put his credentials away. He kept them open, holding them for Officer Jeffries to see. "Officer," Mason continued, "my family and I are required by internal security protocol to never be separated during travel. It is a non-negotiable safety measure, given the nature of my work. Flight attendant Miller was repeatedly informed that we would not be separated. She chose to escalate, to lie about airline policy, to lie about my actions, and to accuse me of a federal crime." He finally turned his head, his cold eyes landing on Mr. Henderson, who was attempting to merge with the upholstery of seat 12C. "The error is a simple double booking. Your manifest will show Mr. Henderson was booked yesterday. We were booked 6 months ago. Your crew," he said, looking back at Susan and Darian, "was too lazy, too biased, or too incompetent to do their jobs." Darian Smith, the purser, who had been watching from the galley, finally seemed to understand the gravity of the mushroom cloud he was standing next to. He scurried forward. "Now, sir, let's not be hasty. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding!" Emir Thorne spoke, her voice shaking with contained fury. "Your employee called my husband a criminal and tried to have him arrested in front of his children. She put her hands on my daughter. This is long past a misunderstanding." The passengers in the front rows, who had heard Mason's title, were now whispering, the news spreading like fire. "Did he say CIA? Deputy Director? Said she endangered him. Oh my God, she tried to arrest a spy." The collective, audible gasp rolled back through the plane. Every phone was now recording, not in secret, but held high like lighters at a concert. This was no longer a passenger dispute. This was a show. Officer Jeffries turned to Darian Smith. "Get your captain. Now. Out of the cockpit. Now." Darian practically ran. Susan Miller was left alone, standing in the aisle between the police and the family she had tormented. Her face had gone from a flush of rage to a ghastly, waxy white. But the manifest, he was non-compliant, she whispered. She was crumbling, the entire scaffolding of her little tyranny collapsing in on her. A minute later, a tall, grey-haired man in a crisp pilot's uniform emerged. This was Captain Miller, no relation to Susan, and he looked furious at being pulled from his pre-flight checks. "What in God's name is going on?" he boomed. "We are 20 minutes from pushback, and I have police on my aircraft." Officer Jeffries met the captain halfway down the aisle, shielding Mason and his credentials from the rest of the plane. They spoke in low, urgent tones. The captain's face went through a rapid series of emotions. First, annoyance, then confusion, then pure, unadulterated horror. He looked past the officer at Mason, who still stood, statue-like, by his row. The captain's eyes widened. He walked forward. His entire demeanor changed. "Dr. Thorne," the captain said, his voice loud enough for the front section to hear. "I am Captain Frank Miller, on behalf of Global Sky Airlines, and as commander of this aircraft, I offer you and your family my deepest, most profound apologies for what you have just experienced." He then turned, and the entire cabin saw a look of absolute thunder on his face. He pointed a finger not at Mason, but at Susan Miller and Darian Smith. "You," he said to Susan. "And you," he said to Darian. "Pack your bags. Get off my aircraft, both of you." Susan's world ended. "Captain, but I was following procedure." "Procedure?" the captain roared, his voice bouncing off the cabin walls. "Procedure is not lying. Procedure is not harassing passengers. Procedure is not fabricating safety rules and calling the police on a family of 4. You have not only humiliated this family, you have put this entire airline at risk. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Get off my plane." Darian Smith, smart enough to know when the game was over, grabbed his small roller bag from the galley and, without a word, his face burning red, marched down the aisle toward the exit. Susan was frozen. I can't. This isn't fair." "Fair?" the captain shot back. "You want to talk about fair? Officer, if she is not off this aircraft in 30 seconds, I want her removed for trespassing." That broke her. With a sob, Susan Miller turned and fled down the aisle, bumping into the wall, her composure shattered. The entire cabin watched as she and Darian performed the walk of shame off the jet bridge. As the door hissed shut behind them, a spontaneous, quiet applause broke out in the first few rows. The tension in the cabin didn't just dissipate, it evaporated. It was replaced by a stunned, buzzing silence as Captain Miller turned back to the Thorne family. He looked exhausted, as if he had just flown the plane through a hurricane. "Dr. Thorne." "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice now gentle. I cannot apologize enough. What you just endured is indefensible." Mason finally, slowly, closed his credential case and slipped it back into his jacket. He nodded, his face still grim. "Thank you, Captain. Your crew was out of line." "Out of line is the understatement of the century, sir." The captain looked at Mr. Henderson, who was still trying to become one with the bulkhead. "Sir," he said, his voice flat. "Get your things. You're moving." "But I'm platinum," Henderson protested weakly. "I don't care if you're the King of England," the captain snapped. "You are in this family's seat. You heard the entire thing, and you said nothing. You're moving. We have a middle seat for you in the back. Row 40, now." Henderson, recognizing a losing battle, scrambled to collect his laptop and bag, tripping over his own feet to get away. He refused to make eye contact with anyone as he shuffled to the back of the plane. Once the row was clear, the captain gestured to it. "Please, your seats." But Mason shook his head. "Captain, with all due respect, after what just happened, my family does not feel comfortable here. My wife is shaking. My son is terrified. And," he added, gesturing to the sea of phones still pointed at them, "we are now the center of attention, which is not ideal." The captain understood instantly. Mason's cover, however non-official, was blown to this entire plane load of people. "You are absolutely right," the captain said. He turned to the third flight attendant, a young woman who looked utterly horrified by the whole event. "Linda, is first class full?" "No, Captain. We have 4 open seats. The suite. 1A, 1B, 1D, and 1G. "Perfect." He turned back to Mason. "Dr. Thorne, you and your family will be my personal guests in the first-class suite. It's the most private space we have. Please let us at least do this for you. Linda will take your bags." Mason looked at Amaya. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears she'd refused to shed. "Yes," she said quietly. "Thank you, Captain." "Right this way," Linda said, her voice full of genuine warmth. "Let's get you settled." As the Thorns gathered their carry-ons, the cabin watched them go. It was a different kind of walk of shame, the walk of vindication. As they passed row 13, Mrs. Peterson, the older woman, reached out and touched Amaya's arm. "You handled that with such grace, my dear," she whispered. "My late husband would have been very impressed." Amaya gave her a watery smile. "Thank you. Thank you for speaking up." "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson said. "Some things just aren't right." They were led through the curtain into the quiet, spacious sanctuary of the first-class cabin. The suites were self-contained pods with high walls and doors that slid shut. Linda showed them how to operate the lay-flat beds and the entertainment systems. "Dr. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne," Linda said, her eyes wide. "Can I get you anything? Champagne, orange juice for the children, just some water, please," Amaya murmured, sinking into the plush seat. "I want ice cream," Liam said, his tears finally drying as the trauma was replaced by the sheer novelty of the giant seat. "You'll get ice cream, buddy," Linda smiled. "As much as you want." As she left, Mason slid the door to their pod closed. The sound of the main cabin disappeared. For the first time in an hour, they were alone. Amir finally let go, her shoulders slumping. "Mason, that was—" "I know," he said, pulling her into a tight hug. Liam scrambled in between them. Clara, trying to act cool, just put her hand on her dad's arm. Are you going to be in trouble?" Clara asked, her voice small. "For showing, you know." Mason stroked her hair. "No, sweetie. They are going to be in trouble. They created a security incident and threatened law enforcement against a federal officer. That's a them problem, not a me problem." But his face was dark. He was already thinking ahead. The entire flight had heard his title. His cover was, at a minimum, compromised. He would have to file a full report. He looked over and saw the in-flight sat phone on the console. "Emir," he said, "I have to make a call. I need to let Langley know what happened before we land." He picked up the heavy receiver, swiped his government credit card, and dialed a number that was not in any public directory. After a series of tones, a flat voice answered. "Secure line 7, the voice said. "This is DNCS Thorne, file code 88 Alpha. I have an incident to report. Protocol violation. Public exposure." He proceeded to give a concise, fact-based summary of the entire event, from Susan's first words to the moment the captain fired her. "Understood, sir," the voice on the other end said. The video is already on Twitter. Looks like CIA Dad is trending. We're running suppression algorithms, but it's out. Mason swore under his breath. Clara, I didn't post it, she defended. I sent it to Aunt Sarah, just to show her what was happening. She must have posted it. It doesn't matter, Mason sighed. The damage is done. Please advise London Station. I need a sterile pickup at Heathrow. Family in tow. This trip is scrubbed. Copy that, Dr. Thorne. We will have a team meet you at the gate. And, sir, the legal division is already spooling up. They're very interested in Global Sky Airlines. Good, Mason said, and hung up. The flight, which should have been a relaxing start to a family vacation, was now an administrative and security headache. But as he looked at his family, safe and together in their private pod, he felt a cold, hard satisfaction. The immediate threat was gone. Now, the consequences would begin. The 7-hour flight to London was surreal. Linda, the remaining first-class attendant, treated the Thornes with the kind of reverent care usually reserved for royalty. Liam ate 2 sundaes and fell asleep watching The Avengers on a 24-inch screen. Clara, sensing the gravity of what her father had done, quietly put her phone away and read a book. Emir, running on adrenaline, sipped a chamomile tea and stared out the window at the dark Atlantic. Mason did not rest. He was on the sat phone for nearly 2 hours, speaking in low, coded language with his superiors, with the agency's legal counsel, and with the London station chief. The vacation part of their trip was over. The conference he was supposed to speak at would have to be done via secure video link. About 3 hours into the flight, a man in the adjacent suite, 2G, stood up and walked over. He was an older, distinguished-looking man with silver hair. He had witnessed the entire event. He didn't knock, but simply spoke quietly to Mason's partially open door. "Excuse me, Dr. Thorne. I hope I'm not intruding." Mason looked up, his face wary. "Can I help you?" The man handed him a business card. "My name is Robert Vance. I'm general counsel for the New York Times. My wife and I were sitting in 14A and B. We saw everything. I'm not here as a journalist," he said, holding up a hand. "I'm here as a citizen who was frankly disgusted." He slid the card onto Mason's console. "I'm sure your employers have their own lawyers. But that was a civil rights violation, plain and simple. What that woman, Susan, did was motivated by an ugly, unmistakable bias. If you need a private attorney, my personal recommendation is on the back of that card. He's the best in New York." Mason took the card. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. I appreciate that." "They picked the wrong family to mess with, Doctor," Vance said with a thin smile. "Safe travels." He retreated to his seat. Mason looked at the card. It was another piece of fallout, another complication, but also another potential weapon. Meanwhile, on the ground, the viral video shot by Clara and several other passengers was not suppressed. It was exploding. The hashtag CIA Dad was #1 worldwide, but it was Global Sky Fail and Fire Susan Miller that were causing the real damage. The clips were damning. They showed Susan sneering at a crying Liam. They showed her inventing the bulkhead rule. They captured her lunging for Clara's phone. Most of all, they captured her triumphant, vicious accusation. "He's non-compliant. His passes are fraudulent." And then, the climax. Mason's cold, clear voice. "I am a deputy director with the Central Intelligence Agency." The internet went insane. At Global Sky Airlines corporate headquarters in Atlanta, it was 9:10 p.m. CEO James Harrison was not at home. He was in the emergency war room, a glass-walled conference room, staring at a monitor showing his airline's stock in after-hours trading. It was plummeting like a stone. What do we know? Harrison barked at his VP of in-flight services, a terrified woman named Cynthia Hayes. Susan Miller, 22 years with the airline, Cynthia read from a tablet, her voice trembling. Darian Smith, 15 years, a purser. The family, Dr. Mason Thorne. His booking was 100% valid, 6 months old, paid in full. The other passenger, Henderson, was a last-minute rebooking after a cancellation. The system did glitch, but it was Susan's and Darian's job to fix it. The manifest would have shown the Thornes booking priority. So they didn't even check? Harrison demanded. No, sir. It appears they just decided. Mr. Henderson, a platinum member, had priority over Dr. Thorne. Over a black family, you mean? Harrison slammed his fist on the table. This isn't just a mistake, Cynthia. This is bias. This is the nightmare scenario. And now... CIA? Is that confirmed? Is it real? A man from their legal team who was on the phone went pale. He hung up. Sir, I just got off the phone with the Department of Justice. What? It wasn't a local field office, sir. It was the main office, National Security Division. They inform us that Global Sky Airlines, and specifically our employees, Miller and Smith, are being investigated for the willful endangerment of a national security asset, violation of federal transportation protocols, and interference with a federal officer. They are not happy. James Harrison sank into his chair. This was not a customer service complaint. This was not a PR problem. This was a national security incident. Get our lawyers, he whispered. Get all of them. When Flight 112 landed at Heathrow at 7 a.m. London time, the Thornes did not go to the normal passport control. As the plane taxied, Captain Miller's voice came over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, due to an operational matter, we ask that all passengers remain seated until our guests in 1A, B, D, and G have disembarked. We apologize for the further delay. The moment the jet bridge connected, 2 grim-faced men in dark, perfectly tailored suits boarded the plane. They nodded at Mason. Dr. Thorne, we're here. Let's get you and your family clear. They escorted the Thornes off the plane, down a private set of stairs, and into a black diplomatic Range Rover waiting on the tarmac. As they drove away, Mason looked back at the 787. The regular passengers were just beginning to filter out, their phones held up, trying to get one last picture of the CIA dad and his family. His vacation was over. But Susan Miller's karma was just beginning. The fallout was not swift. It was total. It was a scorched earth campaign that unwound the lives of everyone who had wronged the Thorne family. For Susan Miller and Darian Smith, they were fired before Flight 112 even touched down in London. But that was just the beginning. The Department of Justice, acting on behalf of the CIA, filed a civil suit against Global Sky. But they also named Susan Miller and Darian Smith as individual co-defendants, citing their gross negligence and willful malicious intent. The internal investigation at Global Sky, led by a frantic Cynthia Hayes, was brutal. They pulled the files on both employees. Darian Smith, it turned out, was Susan's direct supervisor. And Susan Miller had 14 prior passenger complaints of racial bias in the last 3 years alone. Complaints that Darian Smith had personally investigated and dismissed every single time. They were a toxic duo, protecting each other's misconduct. Susan tried to sue for wrongful termination. Her lawyer dropped her case the moment the DOJ's filing became public. The viral video, which showed her lying about the assault, made any claim she had laughable. She was blacklisted, not just from Global Sky, but from the entire Star Alliance. Her flight attendant certifications were reviewed and suspended due to the security incident she had provoked. She lost her condo in Queens because she couldn't make payments. The last anyone heard, Susan Miller was working at a Sparrow in the food court of a New Jersey mall, recognized occasionally by a gleeful TikToker. Darian Smith, smarter but no less culpable, tried to fade away. He moved to Chicago, hoping to get a job in aviation logistics, but the DOJ lawsuit had flagged him. When he applied for the necessary security clearance to work at O'Hare, he was denied. The flag on his name, related to interference with a national security asset, made him unemployable in the industry he had known for 15 years. He ended up managing a self-storage facility in suburban Illinois, his slick purser's uniform replaced by a cheap polo shirt. For Global Sky Airlines, the airline was destroyed in the press. Robert Vance, the New York Times lawyer, didn't need to recommend a private attorney. He simply wrote an op-ed. He described the appalling, naked bias he witnessed. He described a culture of incompetence and aggression that led to the incident. Global Sky's stock dropped 18% in 2 days, wiping out $1.4 billion in market value. They settled with the Department of Justice. The amount was sealed, but industry rumors put it at over $50 million, not including the fines. But the money was the least of it. The airline was forced to sign a 10-year federal consent decree. They had to completely overhaul their D&I, de-escalation, and protocol training, all monitored by a court-appointed federal official. CEO James Harrison was forced to resign by the board. Cynthia Hayes was demoted. The entire Atlanta-based in-flight management team was fired. For the Thorne family, they never filed a civil suit. They didn't have to. The government handled it. They were, however, inundated with apologies. The new CEO of Global Sky sent a personal handwritten letter and offered them lifetime, first-class ambassador status. Mason, in a polite, typed response, declined. He included a note suggesting they donate the monetary value of that status to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Their London trip was cut short. The official business was handled, and they were flown home a few days later on a private, unmarked government jet. The professor cover was, for all intents and purposes, burned. Mason was moved to a new, internal-only position at Langley. A week after they returned, a package arrived at their home. It was a small, beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a note. Dear Dr. Thorne and family, I was the woman in row 13. I was so impressed by the dignity you and your wife showed in the face of such ugliness. I do hope your children are all right. I felt I should tell you. My late husband, Arthur, was station chief in Berlin from 85 to 89. I may be an old lady, but I recognize the look, the one that says, I am being perfectly reasonable. But I am also the most dangerous person on this airplane. You wore it well. Welcome home. Sincerely, Martha Peterson. Inside the box were 4 large, very expensive Belgian chocolate bars. Mason smiled, a real relaxed smile. He looked at Amaya, who was reading over his shoulder. Well, Amaya said, breaking off a piece of chocolate. She certainly was a good ally. She was more than that, honey, Mason said, handing a piece to Liam. She was family. They sat together, quiet and safe, in their own home. The storm was over. The karma had been delivered, and it had been absolute. In the end, it wasn't the CIA credentials that won. It was the truth. Susan Miller and Darian Smith learned that a small bit of authority is a dangerous thing, especially when it's mixed with prejudice. They flew too close to the sun, and their careers were burned to ashes. Global Sky Airlines spent years and hundreds of millions of dollars trying to repair the damage from that single 10-minute encounter. And the Thorne family? They showed the world that grace under pressure is powerful, but that consequences, when they finally arrive, are even more satisfying. What did you think of this story? Have you ever seen a Karen get an instant dose of karma? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice served, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with a friend, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama and hard-hitting karma. Click the bell so you never miss an upload.